What is going on, everyone? The 415ers are back as usual Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Evan Giddings, Marc Grandy. Marc, what's up, my man? How you doing?
I'm doing well, Evan. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Sun's a shining here in sunny San Francisco in the 415, and we hope that it can shine on LA this weekend because the 49ers are headed to SoFi Stadium to take on the Los Angeles Rams in Week 8. We have your preview episode as always. But where I want to start, Marc, and throughout the week, we're kind of taking notes on how players are reacting to right now tough times with the 49ers being 3-4 heading into the last week before the bye. And something that was sort of swirling around yesterday specifically and picked up was some of Jimmie Ward's comments. Now, this is a captain and one of the longest tenured, if not the longest tenured member of the San Francisco 49ers right now, because he was asked to move to the Nickelback position. And I thought that he was kind of a company man in how he responded to it, basically saying, look, I'm going to do what's best for the team.
Mm.
But he did slip in the fact that it was a contract year for him and that Nickelback isn't necessarily his position, but that he's doing this because he needs to. He's not sure if it's going to be permanent, but I'm curious what your takeaway from his comments were, Marc, considering it looked to me like a guy who was saying what he had to, but felt something very different.
Well, yeah, he was asked yesterday in the locker room about it, and he said, I don't know. I'm just going to do what the coaches tell me to do. It's my last year on the contract. I'm just trying to be a great team player. And then, there was a follow up, and a reporter asked Ward if it had been a long time since he'd played in the slot position or the nickel corner spot. And he said, it's been a while since I've been on the field at all. Kind of joking, but obviously that's the truth. I mean, he has not been healthy this year. But he then went on to say, I don't know, man. It's been a challenge, man. Like I said, it's a challenge. Maybe if I was at safety, I don't know. It probably would have been a challenge there too. So there's clearly, maybe a little bit of unhappiness there from Jimmie Ward. And honestly, you can probably understand why. I mean, this was a guy that was voted as a top 100 player by his peers in the NFL as a safety. Jaquiski Tart, his former safety mate over the last number of years, has gone to Twitter and kind of defended Jimmie Ward, the safety, not Jimmie Ward, the nickel corner. And it could really just be a 1 week thing. I mean, the Niners did it last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, and that was essentially to match up Jimmie Ward on Travis Kelce for the most part. And Kelce, he was, pretty good still, 98 receiving yards, but it's not like he was a game wrecker for the Chiefs against the 49ers. So you could argue that Jimmie Ward did a pretty decent job there. However, what becomes interesting is the Niners now have the Rams this week, and who's going to play on the slot offensively for the Rams? That's Cooper Kupp. So it's a question of who do you want to match up on Cooper Kupp for the most part. And I think what this move means, at least if the 49ers continue it, they continue to use Jimmie Ward as their nickel corner. It means that they're at least content with how Tashaun Gibson is playing at free safety, which would be where Jimmie Ward is playing if he does play safety. And I think it also means that the Niners are not happy with replacement level corners at that nickel spot. That's Deommodore Lenoir, that's Samuel Womack, and that's Ambry Thomas. So I think we kind of have a combination of things going on here. Gibson probably playing better than the Niners previously thought was going to happen. And then not too much development from their young corners, again, in Lenoir, Womack, and Thomas. All that together means that Jimmie Ward in the slot corner spot, the nickel corner spot, might be the best defensively for the 49ers, despite the fact that he is clearly a better safety than he is a slot corner.
No, that's true, and it's sort of that trickle down, that domino effect that is forcing, as you mentioned, Jimmie Ward to play that spot. To me, it kind of comes down to the fact that Ambry Thomas just has not really been up to the standard that the 49ers need right now on the outside, because if so, that would force Lenoir back in the nickel spot instead. It's going to be Jimmie Ward. They feel like he's the best guy on Cooper Kupp. Also, the fact that Tashaun Gibson has been pretty good at the free safety position throughout this season means that they can use Ward all around the field. One thing that I think is interesting is this is not the first time that this has happened for the 49ers. I don't know if you remember this, but I believe it was Eric Reed in 2017 was forced from safety to play linebacker in a contract year. and was a little disgruntled about that. I don't know if it's a coincidence that it was maybe the end of his time, or the fact that it turned out to be his last year in San Francisco. He played 3 more years in Carolina, was a pretty effective, strong safety with the Panthers. But, this is, and Ward, of course, has been the longest tenured member of this team. He may also have some recollection of that and what happened in the aftermath with Reed. Could be certainly worried about what his career is going to continue to be in or outside of San Francisco, as well as not necessarily being featured in his best position in a contract year. So I could certainly see where Jimmie Ward is not only worried about, of course, having to guard Cooper Kupp on Sunday, a guy that is probably the best receiver, certainly best slot receiver, maybe best receiver in football, but also worried about how that's going to basically affect his pockets in the future. Because if someone sees him as primarily a nickelback instead of a free safety, and that's where the majority of the tape is this year, and it's coming against guys like Cooper Kupp and other top-notch receivers, and he's getting burnt because he's wearing a club, or he's hurt, or he's not able to put his best foot forward, that's going to affect his future deal. So I can see Jimmie Ward having seen what happened in 2017, as well as what maybe is happening now, and feeling like, man, I'm kind of getting the short end of the stick here.
Yeah, and I mean that's also something that that his former teammate Jaquasi Tart mentioned on Twitter as well. We talked about how this is a contract year and how the 49ers are potentially costing Jimmie Ward some money. You play him maybe a little bit out of position. He doesn't perform quite as well. Maybe that affects how much he gets on the open market. I think it's too early to be talking about that. And it's certainly not, the Niners plan to do that. I think that they just simply feel that given the construction of their defensive secondary at the moment, that's probably the best way to go about it. Maybe that changes if Jason Verrett comes back. It seems pretty unlikely that that'll be this week. He was activated off the physically unable to perform list, but that just opens the window for 21 days for him to be added to the 53-man roster. Does not mean he has to play within that 3-week span, just means the Niners at some point in that 3-week span will have to add him to the 53-man roster. It has not happened yet. But one thing that is interesting is what DeMeco Ryans said on Thursday about Jimmie Ward and about their nickel corner spot overall. He was asked about Jimmie and kind of his abilities at nickel, and he said, well, that's what we did last week for that game, and we'll see how it goes essentially moving forward into this week and beyond. But DeMeco added, Jimmie is a unique player in that sense, and I think that Jimmie can do things that other players just can't. His versatility is very unique. He's probably one of the only guys in this league that can do safety, can come down in the box, can play nickel. He can do it all, blitzing, covering. Not too many guys can do that. So certainly very complimentary. Interestingly enough, though, there was a follow-up question asked about Charvarius Mooney Ward. Hey, DeMeco, does Mooney Ward have the ability to play in the slot in certain matchups? And DeMeco Ryans said, I think Mooney is another guy who can do whatever. He can play outside, play in the slot. I think he can do a little bit of both. So that kind of, lit 49ers Twitter on fire, because there are a lot of 49er fans who do not want to see Jimmie Ward in the slot. They want to see maybe their best matchup man-to-man corner in the slot against Cooper Kupp, and maybe we'll see some Charvarius Mooney Ward in that role. What does that mean for Jimmie Ward? Does he slot over to safety? Does it push Deshaun Gibson out of the rotation for a game just because it is Cooper Kupp? I'm not exactly sure, but I think it is something to keep an eye on.
No, it is. That is interesting. And I get it. Look, if you're going up against Cooper Kupp, you ideally want your best man on him. The thing that gives me pause and why I sort of do understand why Jimmie Ward will be playing in the slot is because the 49ers, I mean, DeMeco Ryans mentioned on Thursday that it is the Cooper Kupp show. That's who they're going to get the ball to. That's who they want to get the ball to. I apologize for the fire trucks outside. It might be Cooper Kupp coming to town. I don't know. But largely, he's killed the Niners no matter who's been on him. I mean, now the question is, are those empty calories? Are those shallow yards, or are those yards that hurt you? Because we saw both this season as well as last season, and we'll dig deeper into the Rams game coming up in just a little bit. But I do think this point in the conversation we're having is worth mentioning. Cooper Kupp had 12 catches for 120 odd yards on Monday night earlier this year. and largely was ineffective. Last year in the championship game, however, he had about 12 catches for 140 yards with 2 touchdowns, was very effective in the win that got the Rams to the Super Bowl. There is a difference in what Cooper Kupp can do to you if you simply allow him to get 6, 7, 8 yards a catch, as opposed to what he normally does, which is catching, intermediate to deep balls. He can beat you after the catch. I understand where the 49ers feel like, hey, okay, maybe we're not going to put our best guy on Cooper Kupp and have him travel with him the entire game, because Cooper Kupp's going to get his. The question is, can we shut down everyone else, which is what they did on Monday night earlier this year against the Rams.
Well, yeah, and the reality is, kind of what you're talking about. One, it's not just as simple as one guy going up against Cooper Kupp. It's a solid defense team wide. But the reality is, if DeMeco Ryans is worth his salt as a defensive coordinator, he's not going to just throw a single guy on Cooper Kupp and say good luck, because you're you're going to get roasted. It's going to be a team effort to try to slow down Cooper Kupp. You're going to have zone defenders shaded his way. You're going to throw double teams his way. So it's not quite as simple as saying, all right, Jimmie Ward, go do your thing in the slot against Cooper Kupp. It's not as simple as saying, hey, Charvarius Mooney Ward, go do your thing. Try to slow him down, because it doesn't matter who you are individually. Cooper Kupp is so good, and he has a great connection with Matthew Stafford, that any one individual defender is not going to be able to do that job very well. So maybe we're splitting hairs a little bit in terms of who's matched up against him in the corner, because again, the likelihood is we will see multiple players against him. We'll probably see multiple players lined up against him in the corner throughout the game, or in that nickel spot throughout the game. And then we'll see, some shaded help from Hufanga at safety, from Gibson at another safety spot, and then maybe from some of those other young corners that we mentioned off the top in Lenore, Womack, and Ambry Thomas. We'll probably see multiple bodies thrown his way, because there's no way that any single person is going to be able to stop him by themselves.
Yeah, it's going to be like trying to stop a top scorer in basketball. You're not just going to see one guy on him the entire game. For all those 49ers fans are also Warriors fans, in their heyday, you're going to throw Klay Thompson at him. You're going to throw Andre Iguodala at him. You're going to throw different defenders at a top guy to try and slow him down, knowing that whoever it is probably still going to get their 30 points. I do think that it is interesting that Jimmie Ward is not necessarily being put in the greatest position to succeed. And not that Pro Football Focus is the end all be all, Mark, but if you just take a look at his coverage grades throughout his career, they have not been as high as the other things that DeMeco Ryans mentioned that he does on the field, as far as blitzing, as far as playing the run, being able to play multiple positions, and that he's definitely the best version of himself in that free safety spot. But of course, you got Gibson, who maybe isn't able to play in the slot. You've got, as you mentioned, other corners that can't play those positions. So I could also maybe see Jimmie Ward. Look, no one wants to admit their faults or their, what they're not good at. But if you just take a look at what he has been able to do better than coverage, it's a lot of different things. So I'm certainly going to keep track of that, and how, if it is more of a permanent thing. I don't believe it'll be. I think Jason Barrett is probably the key to all of this, and hopefully he can stay healthy when he does come back. He was a limited practice participant on Thursday. We'll see on Friday. DeMeco Ryans said he was progressing. Who knows if he'll be ready on Sunday? My guess is that they'll try and ramp him up to get him back after the bye week,
Yeah.
with some of those other guys that we're going to discuss. But it's interesting, Mark, for sure, and will have an impact on the game one way or another.
Oh, of course it will. I mean, I think that's one of in terms of everything beyond injuries, I think this is one of the more interesting kind of chess piece moves that the Niners can make in this game. I'm not exactly sure which one is the right move. I tend to side, on DeMeco Ryan's side. What he did last week against the Chiefs is, just put your best players on the field. Maybe one of them feels a little out of position, but put your best players on the field right now. And it's pretty obvious, at least in my opinion, that your best players on the defensive secondary include Tayshaun Gibson, include Jimmie Ward, and unfortunately do not include those youngsters, Lenore, Womack, and Thomas. So you put your best players out there and you deal with the consequences of those actions. It's probably the best decision for a Niners team that right now has some questions in the defensive secondary. But as you mentioned, when they get a bit healthier, I think we'll see a more common and consistent lineup back there.